Today is Tuesday, January 9th, and the time is 6:31 p.m., and I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Delory,
Here.
Mata, Stiegel,
Here.
Onken,
Here?
Shield, James,
Here.
Serrato.
Here.
Okay. We do have a quorum. Item number 3, minutes. Item 3A, Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes for December 12, 2023, regular meeting. We need a motion and a second to approve those.
With a motion.
Yes.
I move that we approve item 3A.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner James and a second from Commissioner Stiegel. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries. Item number 4, citizen comments. Item 4A, citizen comment period. The Planning and Zoning Commission welcomes comments from citizens early in the agenda of regular meetings. Speakers are provided with an opportunity to speak during this time period on any agenda item or any other matter concerning city business, and they must observe the 3-minute time limit. So at this time, I will open citizen comments. Excellent. Okay. I will close those. Thank you. Item number 5, consent. Item 5A, the Crosswinds Subdivision Phase 6B, and item 5B for Center 81 PEC Subdivision Lot 2 Block A. So we will need a motion and second to approve the consent items.
Madam Chair, motion now, consent to item 5A.
Only 5A? Or both?
5A and 5B.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion from Vice Chair Delory and a second from Commissioner Stiegel to approve the consent items. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries. Moving right along. Item number 6, consider and possible action. Item 6A, consider and make a recommendation to City Council regarding a request by Todd Leverett of Mayse and Associates for a conditional height exception pursuant to Section 53-1047-12 and Section 53-1048 of the City of Kyle Code of Ordinances for property located at 22497 IH 35 in Hays County, Texas. Country Inn Suites, CUP-23-0093. There is a public hearing for this item, so I'll go ahead and open that now at 6:34 p.m. I shall close it now at 6:34 p.m. Do we have a presentation for this item?
Yes, Kayla Sharp, City Planner for the record. So this is a conditional use permit for a height variance, so it's a little bit different than what y'all have seen in the past. So this is a property located a little bit off of the I-35 frontage road. If y'all are familiar with where the 7-Eleven and Starbucks are across from at Center Street and I-35, it's over in that area. The zoning is retail services, and the maximum height allowed per the zoning is 45 feet. This request would allow them to build up to 58 feet in height, and it's also within the I-35 overlay, just to make note of that. So per section 53-1047-12, a conditional use permit is allowed to be granted to authorize an exception to the maximum height up to 150 feet, and the applicant is requesting a maximum height of 58 feet. This will accommodate a 4-story, minimum 87 guest room hotel. So here is kind of the site plan, and then this just kind of gives you an idea for what the height will be and kind of some of the details going along with that. And then the side. And then this is just a contour map to kind of show you the difference in height from the street and then the actual site. It's only about a 2-foot difference. It's not that much, but then if you look at this kind of Google Street View from I-35, there's definitely a slope downward to the site. So while they're requesting 58 feet, which might sound like a lot, it's not, from I-35, it's not going to seem like it's that much higher than what would typically be allowed per the zoning. So staff has determined that this request is reasonable and allowed pursuant to section 53-1047 subsection 12, and we would request that the commission recommend approval to city council. And then also just want to note that this will be considered by city council next week on January 16th, and then dependent upon their vote, a conditional use permit for the I-35 overlay for the materials will be brought forward at a later date. So this request is specifically about height, and then with the I-35 overlay, the materials will come back later. So, any questions?
I don't think anyone has questions. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just have a question on the letter from the associates here, Mayse and Associates. One of the reasons they said that they wanted the height variance is because they're actually putting in ground floor level meeting rooms.
Yes.
And that's something that's been discussed with staff.
So generally, we don't, they have shared that with us as well, but that's generally not something we necessarily consider
into.
when looking at these things, but they will have some taller ceilings on the ground floor for the lobby, for meeting rooms, things like that, things that are pretty standard for hotels.
Okay, thank you.
So we will need a motion and a second to make a recommendation on this item.
With a motion, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I move that we approve item 6A.
Second.
Okay, I have a question. So this item is phrased as making a recommendation to council. So a recommendation, the motion is to make the recommendation to approve. Can I rephrase his motion that way, or does he have to
Yeah.
rephrase his own motion?
No, I think that works. It's their motion is to recommend or approve, so that should.
Okay. Okay. So we have a motion to recommend approval of item 6A from Commissioner James and a second by Commissioner Serrato. Is there any discussion on that motion before we vote?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with the planning staff. It's a reasonable request. I'd be less inclined to think it a reasonable request if it was immediately adjacent to the frontage road. And so for future reference, I wouldn't be so inclined, but in this instance I am. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, thanks.
I would agree with Commissioner DeJory that particularly being on a slope, that does account for the height difference. I would add, though, that for our thought, that this is would be the nearest accommodations, public accommodations to near downtown. And if we have any intention really of carrying through with the downtown redevelopment, it might be quite the thing to have that available to us. I would further note, the reason I asked about meeting rooms is that I think that there are a few meeting rooms, public meeting rooms in the city, and that would be a very good location to have available meeting rooms for public and private purposes.
Any other comments? Alrighty, so again, the motion is to approve this item. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Motion carries.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Item 6B, consider and make recommendations to City Council to adopt the City of Kyle 2030 Comprehensive Plan. Tonight is the second public hearing for this item, so I'll open that now at 6:40 p.m. And it will be closed now at
Unmuted.
6:40 p.m. Do we have a presentation on the item?
Yes, Jason Lutz, Senior Planner for the record.
So we're culminating in the end of a 2-year process here tonight. This is the second public hearing on a comprehensive plan. We do have Marshall Hines. He's with Verdunity. He will be leading this presentation on our final wrap-up, and then you'll be making your recommendation to City Council to move forward. So this will be considered by Council on the January 16th meeting. So Marshall, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then if y'all have any questions for staff, we can answer that after that.
Well, I like to think of myself as a well-prepared person, and I'm realizing now that a file I need to open is not playing nice with me, so bear with me here for just a second. There we go. Apologies. So before we get started, I just want to really tell everyone how excited I am to be here. This process got started in September of 2022. We've been working with most of you for all of that time. For those of you that I haven't yet met, my name is Marshall Hines. I'm the creative director for Verdunity, which is a planning and engineering firm based here out of Texas that the city contracted with to help guide this process and put together a comprehensive plan to help guide the future of Kyle. So what I am hoping to do tonight is both for your own sake, it's been a long time coming that we've been working on this, and the public's, I'm going to take you through just sort of a quick overview of the plan itself. We'll talk about a few of the bits of feedback that we got through the feedback form that we provided back, I think it was in September, as well as the work session that you guys did with City Council and staff. And then I will be available for discussion, questions, clarifications at the end. So with no further ado, we'll get started. The plan itself it has sort of three big intents. We're trying to accomplish three important things with this one document. The first is that we want to educate and inform. The document was very intentionally written and designed so that it's accessible and readable by many different groups. Of course, the principal users of this document are going to be yourselves, the city council members, the staff. But it's really important, if you want a community to have buy-in to a guiding document like this, that they can feel that they can understand the material that's in it. And thus, the plan aims to inform on many of the concepts that are necessary to understand land use planning and the way that neighborhoods get built. And so that is the first of the three big things that the plan is trying to do. The second is that it is attempting to communicate the fiscal realities on the ground in Kyle today as it pertains to land use and development. So the plan discusses how the economics of land use work, and it also talks about fiscal sustainability and how you can work toward a more fiscally sustainable future. And then lastly, the plan aims to provide a framework for decision-making in the future. By tying your land use decisions to the tenets of the plans that we see all the way through the document, in the recommendations and the actions in the implementation chapter, you can really be checking yourself as you make the kinds of deliberative decisions that come before you here about whether those choices are reflecting what the community and yourselves have articulated throughout this process. So I want to talk a little bit about the organization itself of the plan. It's broken up into only 4 chapters. The first chapter is the introduction, and that's the one that's really going to get heavily at the educational underpinning for many of the concepts that are going to run throughout the document. It really sets the stage for the rest of the material. The second chapter is called Land Use Fiscal Analysis, and this includes both the land use fiscal analysis that was done early in this process, but it also provides some background material on the things that can affect how a fiscal analysis of a community turns out. So it does a little bit of that educating as well. Chapter 3 is the major components chapter, and this is where we get into the real heart of the recommendations that are being made in the categories of land use and neighborhoods. And we look at many of the concepts and strategies that are being recommended to get Kyle to a stronger and more resilient future. And then the final chapter is the implementation chapter, and that takes all of the recommendations of the plan and it breaks them down into a series of very actionable steps. The relevant players inside the city government are identified, as well as residents and community members that can also take part in that implementation, which we believe to be a very important part of this going forward. So I want to take you through just some high-level topics that are covered throughout the document. We'll go through it in order. Chapter 1, the introduction, is focused on that in educating and informing. Kyle's development pattern over time is addressed here in this chapter, and we explore how the massive expansion that you've had has affected the fiscal bottom line throughout the community's history. The chapter also explains how factors such as things like lot coverage and building height affect how much value is created in the city. But it also pairs that with discussion of the character and intensity of development, as well as the infrastructure costs associated with those development patterns. Character and intensity were things that were of principal concern to a lot of the public as we were working through our engagement activities. We also set up and explain how the engagement work that was done throughout this process really ties into the document. We want the plan to tie very directly to the feedback that we got from yourselves, council, staff, and the community. We want to make clear how that ties into the document. Moving into chapter 2, which is the land use fiscal analysis chapter. The land use fiscal analysis takes a really holistic view of the financial situation in Kyle as it pertains to land use. We look at a budget breakdown and what the city is spending to maintain its roads and infrastructure today. You all will remember this from one of our very first meetings, that much of what we found is that if the city is really trying to set aside enough money to ensure that there are funds available to be able to rebuild roads when that's necessary, that is not being achieved right now. And if that continues, then that ultimately can cause significant fiscal problems down the road. The plan also identifies a series of revenue per acre goals for development throughout the community that would ensure that the city is adequately funding, has the funds to adequately fund streets and other infrastructure maintenance. And really, really importantly, the plan shows what a more fiscally sustainable development pattern looks like. And the truth is that it looks like a really nice place to live. In both the infill and greenfield development patterns, the kinds of places that are fiscally sustainable tend to provide more diverse housing options and more diverse price points. They also can provide much more open space through thoughtful conservation of natural areas, and they mix neighborhood-scaled services into development in a way that actually can reduce the amount of traffic that's being put onto your arterial roadway system. In Chapter 3, which are the major components, in the land use component, we look at the logical places for growth by assessing where there is currently vacant land and where that intersects with land that already has infrastructure running to it, so that new development can be focused where you already have made investments in the ground. But it does also accept that there are capacity challenges that your staff is working through, and so it identifies areas which will continue to need attention to be able to support the kind of growth that you're expecting. Chapter 3 introduces and explains the modern tool for land use planning, which are place types, and these supplant what are generally use-based land use designations, and they allow for more flexibility across the city. They're going to focus primarily on the character of each place. So the plan aims to illustrate both in words on each one of these pages and in images how these place types could and should feel. And very importantly, the plan ties these place types to the built environment by indicating the building typologies that are appropriate in each one of these place types. There are a series of growth sectors which are introduced, and these are based significantly on your current infrastructure build-out to help focus, when possible, where new development should be going before you start installing new lines out to the farthest reaches of the ETJ. And as Chapter 3 moves into the neighborhoods component, the levels of intensity of development and the mixing of housing typologies is also discussed, as well as the beneficial implications of this, which is, of course, stuff like more affordable housing options. You all may remember the discussions that we had where we were talking about those varying levels of housing intensity and where the breakpoints were for how that felt appropriate to you within the city of Kyle. And so this part of the major components chapter really attempts to synthesize and represent how existing communities can flex and improve over time, but also very importantly to present a better paradigm for new neighborhoods as you have development coming to you in the future. And then we spend time talking about the design elements that make up different types of neighborhoods. And these neighborhoods are sort of laid out along a pedestrian to auto-oriented continuum. This is really important, especially when you're presented with the opportunity to approve plans for new neighborhoods. You want to be able to determine what kind of a neighborhood it ought to be. Ought to be a rural neighborhood, a transitional neighborhood, or a more complete neighborhood. And when you use these design guidelines, when you check, for example, something coming before you against these design guidelines, you can say, well, we believe the intent is that it is to be, for example, a complete neighborhood. Does this proposal really show all of these, or at least many of these elements that make up a complete neighborhood, or does it trend somewhere else? So it can help alignment in that as you progress forward. And then the document wraps up with Chapter 4, which is the implementation strategy. And that is really designed around making meaningful change through many small actions, as opposed to big monumental projects. The key decision-making principles, which were identified very early in this process through the public engagement that we did just across the street, as a matter of fact, is presented in this chapter, as well as a series of questions that you can kind of ask yourself as you're working through decisions that this body has to make sure that you're in alignment with what has been articulated, as I said earlier, by yourselves, the council, and the community for how they want their leaders to be making decisions. And then the actual recommendations of the plan are all brought together and sorted by their major components, and then a series of general recommendations are included in the final chapter as well. What's really key here as you begin implementing the plan is that you can use the smaller actions which are underneath those recommendations to really make that meaningful progress. The pages are sorted to provide you with all of the knowledge you need to get started on a task. So each recommendation, as I said, is broken up into those smaller parts. The type of action being recommended is identified. You all played a pretty significant part in this, as a matter of fact, because the activity that we did back in July was really about prioritizing individual actions and getting a better understanding of yours and the council's ideas about how they wanted to focus their energies for particular actions to be taken after the plan was adopted. Many of the actions and a whole lot of the phasing was directly influenced by that workshop. How each individual action is tied to the values and aspirations that were identified through this planning process are in there, when they should happen, so you've got timing, phasing included. The city departments that should plug in to each action, because not every city department has to get involved in every action. Which deliberative bodies like yourself and other city entities would be involved, and really crucially, how members of the public can plug into actions. We cannot stress enough that involving the public in the actual implementation activities gives a real sense of ownership of these activities to the community. And so having a clear framework where you can say, here is how the public could help with regard to this particular action is very powerful. So each of those are included as well. So that's a quick overview of the plan. I don't want to rush anybody. I can pause anytime you want me to. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was some of the feedback that we got, and I was just going to talk through how we approached that as we were updating the plan. Is it all right with you guys if I head on to that? Okay, great. So The majority of the comments that we got were from chapters 2 and 3. We absolutely did get a few from chapters 1 and 4, but most of those were things that we just felt could be added to the plan as is. They didn't require a lot of discussion. I'm not one generally for hyperbole, but I really have to say that almost every bit of feedback that we got throughout this process was really meaningful and really good, and most of it we just integrated into the plan as it came to us, which is not often the case. There were a few things we want to chat with you guys a little bit about, but anyway, kudos to you guys on the council and staff. So what did we hear in chapter 2? Well, the first thing, and this I believe came from the work session, there was this question about, does the plan designate green space in the community? What the comp plan does is it takes a holistic approach to green space. Throughout the plan, we focus on the importance of open spaces, and we try to infuse that through every chapter of the document. Growth management speaks to how you preserve land overall, but identifying specific locations that are perhaps undevelopable for one reason or another is something that would have to be done, through a code amendment, and we believe, we've been informed that there is a process either beginning or to come soon, that there's a parks plan update that is on the book, so to speak. And so that's really the place where specific designations like that would be more appropriate. Second item is we were asked, is there a trade-off? Like, do we give more density for green space, on a one-to-one basis? Effectively the same answer as before, but you don't put that in a comp plan, but you do it in a code update. So you approach those things on a code level, and so that would be the place that you would sort of focus on that. There was a question about the fiscal analysis and differences in what is on the ground today and where we were when the fiscal analysis was done at the beginning of the plan. That's a very good point. It's both factually true and correct to have it in the document as it was, as the assessment was done at the beginning of the process. That was always intended to be effectively a snapshot in time. It basically gives you a baseline on where the community was before you adopted this plan and began implementing the plan. And one of the recommendations in the implementation chapter is to come back and do another fiscal analysis in reasonable intervals. You can do them yearly, but it makes a lot more sense to do it on a 3 to 5 year basis. And what you can do is you can say, okay, let's take a look at parts of our community and compare them. You get a lot of meaningful information out of the comparison. So what we have in the document is that snapshot of the city as it was when the assessment was run. There was a question about the traffic created from infill development. We made clear that it really is possible to park an infill development. You'll see that on page 57 of the document. But traffic reduction really comes from the development pattern itself. When you put people closer to the things that they want to have access to, they use their automobiles less. And that is something that comes over time. So, higher intensity in a vacuum is not what this plan is looking for. It's looking for seamlessly adapting the community over time. And so traffic concerns are alleviated by allowing people to have access to the things that they want to more closely at hand. And then in chapter 3, there was a question about the downtown boundaries. It seemed as though basically the concern was, how are the downtown boundaries being identified and are they a part of this plan? The downtown boundaries as determined by the downtown plan are not affected by this plan. We don't even touch on that in the document. It's not intended to override or supplant. The boundaries that have much of anything to do with downtown in this plan are the traditional neighborhood place type, which much of downtown is tagged as on the future land use map, and the infill and enhanced growth sector. Both of these are getting at different things, right? The downtown boundary as it pertains to the downtown plan is about character of downtown, et cetera, architectural standards. Here we're talking about, for example, in the infill and enhance growth sector, it's really about the development pattern that's already on the ground and respecting and maintaining that in the future. There was a question about schools and where they develop. I think that the supposition was that, well, the district has decided we're doing all of these schools out on the fringe. And so how is that going to play into a development pattern that might change along with this comprehensive plan? The basic answer to that is that school districts build schools where people are. If you continue to build in a suburban pattern that sprawls outward, you will continue to get schools that are reflective of that pattern. If the pattern changes, the schools have lots of very talented demographic folks on staff who will update those plans. And the plan, we even had a couple of interviews with the superintendent of schools at the early part of this comprehensive planning process, so they were aware of what was going on with this plan as well. And then lastly, there was concern that perhaps the future land use plan is not really accommodating for people who just want a single family detached house. It's really important that we dispel that. That's not the case with this plan at all. If you just think about, for example, the traditional neighborhood place type and the rural place type, both of which would provide for single family housing, those make up something like 90% of the land area on your future land use map. So we're not trying to put anybody in a position where if you want a single family home, you can't have one. What we are trying to do is to allow for other housing typologies to be introduced to these areas where historically you would have only allowed single family detached houses. So that is really the crux of the plan, not to disallow a particular housing type. So that covers anything that I didn't cover here. Effectively just got updated in the document as we received the feedback. So that's what I have for you guys. I'm very willing to answer questions, clarify, but I'm here at your disposal. So, and again, it's been a pleasure working with you guys.
Thank you very much. I guess at this time we can open it up for questions. Just let me know and I'll give you the floor if you want to go. Didn't see that coming. Wait, you want to talk? Yes,
I was going to fill the void as I might. Speaking for myself, of course, we've been through this process for an awfully long time, and going through all the documents again, I found that I was fairly well satisfied with what's been accomplished, certainly. So I really don't have any questions per se for you, but I'm glad we have come to this point, right? And I'm glad that we now are going to be faced with the consideration of implementation once this is approved. And that this is something that I will say here at this point is of great interest to me as a citizen, as a member of P&Z, because it's going to take a lot of collaboration of people in this room and people who are listening and the council to begin to put this into action. And it's really going to take a lot of work and effort and paying attention in a particular way, making reference to this document when we're going through the code, for instance. I'm very interested in that process so that we really can begin to make change here. When we started this process, I had the sense it was already getting ahead of us with what I knew clearly. The developers are always a step ahead of us, and if we're going to really shape the future of the community in the physical world, and then how we live in this space, it's really best to get on with this quickly and really collaborate quite clearly with each other. So I would just offer that in the void here for a moment. Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I want to start off by saying thank you to Mr. Hines and the Verdunity team. I think we did a good job by choosing an excellent team to help guide us through the process, and I was happy to participate through it. I felt like my voice and the voice of Planning and Zoning Commission was heard throughout, and I thank you for asking us to participate in the public hearings and other sessions that you had going. So thank you for that. I'm going to echo some of the comments from my esteemed colleague here. I think that this is what you might call the kickoff for the real project, and that is helping to shape our city for the future. But I think we're up to the task, looking forward to it, and thanks again.
I saw that we had Tracy or Commissioner Sheila in the meeting, so if she wants to speak, I want to give her the opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. Sorry I couldn't be there. But I just want to say thank you, everybody. I know I came in late to the process and didn't have much input except for in the community side of things. But this was a project started back in 2017 or 2018, really when we really wanted to get this project started, and then we put it on the back shelf. And then we got pulled back up again. So I want to commend everybody on the P&Z Commission who has worked so hard to get this finally going and getting it done properly. So thank you to everybody, and thank you for the team, just as a whole, staff, P&Z, even council, and the community as well. I was very impressed with the way a lot of the citizens, and we got quite a bit of public input, and I was very appreciative of that as well. So thank you, everybody, and I think we have a good comprehensive plan, and now we just need to initiate it and comply with it. All right, so thank you so much.
Thanks. So I'll go ahead and go next. A question, I guess, for staff real quick. So any comments that we give tonight, are they able to make modifications still to the plan, or is what was presented to us tonight it? Because I have a few, like crossing the T's, dotting the I's sort of things that I found when I did a reread of it. And I can list those if it's helpful, but if we would rather just be ignorant of them because we can't fix them, then I'll keep them to myself.
We won't fix them before it goes to council, so the document will be presented to council as is. But if you do have changes you want to make or things call out, please include those in those motions. Then council, when they consider it, if it's minor things, typos, verbiage, they can approve those. If it's something else that maybe changes the place typology or something, that would be at council's discretion on whether they could make that change. So they may agree with you or may not. So the changes will get made and they will get brought up to council, but not in the document itself. It needs to be presented in the same form it was presented here tonight.
Okay. So I guess I would go through those in a motion. Okay. I will save those for later. And then I did have a couple of questions that I wanted to raise just about content. So our decision-making principle for equity and justice, that's on page 118, or if you're looking at the PDF, it's 126. It states that decisions regarding transportation, parks and open space, and retail development should be made with equity and justice in mind. So it's logical to me that a city has responsibility allocating resources for transportation, parks, open space. I don't really understand how the city is meant to address equity and justice for retail development. So could someone explain that for me, please?
Equity and justice in retail is a little bit different than kind of serving your average citizen. But we do have to treat all businesses the same. So we can't just go through and be arbitrary and capricious on what type of restaurants we want in. So we know Kyle wants restaurants, but say a particular restaurant were to come in that some in the city would not want to frequent, we can't just ban those because they don't like that type of restaurant or that type of bar. So that's where we do have to be equitable and provide those landowners and homeowners their justice, either through the due process, through variances or conditional use permits. So that's kind of what that speaks to, if that answers your question.
Okay. That is not what I thought you were going to say. I have to digest that for a second.
I mean, that's just one example. Anybody else want to take a stab at part two?
Did you have anything, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. The whole concept of every one of the decision-making principles is to provide sort of a new framing when you're thinking about decisions that you're making. I wouldn't want to suggest that it's so granular as to say that what you need to do is assess individual developments through a more convoluted lens than you would otherwise. But what we do want to keep in mind, if we're thinking about creating an equitable and just Kyle at large, is that we should be conscious of the development patterns that we are supporting and endorsing through our approvals of particular development patterns. And as we continue on, after the plan is adopted and you start thinking about things like coding, updating a code or other guiding documents for the community, that lens, the lens of ensuring that we don't build unnecessary bias into our decision-making process is important. So I wonder if, just for my own clarity, are you taking issue with the concept of applying a decision-making principle around equity and justice to development, or the fact that it's referring specifically to retail development?
I guess so. When I'm thinking about retail development, to me, that's a private thing.
Sure.
It makes sense to me that government would have responsibility over allocating its own resources. So when we're talking about government allocating resources, what does that have to do with retail development? And I thought the direction that we were going to hear tonight was going to be in regards to incentives and tax rebate, things like that. And my concern around that is, I guess I don't want us to be picking winners and losers based on the physical location of something in the city. So that's kind of the direction that my brain was thinking, but that's not what I'm hearing from y'all, so that might not be the case there. These words are just kind of word salad to me. Everyone has their own interpretation of equity and justice, and I want to make sure that because this is a decision-making principle, that's very important, right? I want to make sure that everyone is clear about what that would look like or mean for the city.
I think that at least with regard to the way that it was originally written, it was thinking largely about development patterns, and that we make decisions. I mean, let's just be very frank. I mean, it was a very common thing that we heard from members of the community, that they feel that there is often a divide in the city of Kyle between the east and west sides of town. And so when this was being drafted, there was thought going into, if we're allocating our resources all in one part of the city, that inherently is not providing equity for people in other parts of the city. And so approaching our decisions and our allocation of resources in a way that is suffuse and provides opportunities citywide, that is the intent of the language here. I'm certainly open to suggestions if you feel like it's not getting at that or that it's confusing, because what we really want to do is we want to communicate that Kyle is a big place geographically. There is a lot of land area over which the city of Kyle has some jurisdictional power. And so we should allocate our resources, we as the community of Kyle should allocate our resources in a way that is equitable to everyone in the city of Kyle. So I hope that answers your question a little bit more. Though I'm open to discussing it, of course.
Yeah.
And Chairman, I think you're on track with that. You know, my response was based kind of on a zoning land use perspective. Marshall's is more comp plan, but you know, from a commercial development, notwithstanding incentives, just talking about resources themselves, some commercial developments, depending on their type, may require additional water usage or LUE capacity at our plant that may not be available for someone else. So we do need to take those into account when we're looking at big PUDs or development agreements. You know, if someone asks for additional LUEs, are we sacrificing someone else's LUEs to give them more? Are we doing it fair? Is our infrastructure going to handle it? Can we spread that out? So I think this key question is going to come up in a lot of different ways and being addressed in a lot of different ways. So if you do have some concerns on the language or you want something to kind of clarify that, please put that in your motion so we can work with Virginity to add that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I have the right words to clarify it either, but I had to ask, because if you don't ask, you don't learn. So there's that. My last substance question is from the implementation section. So it's page 130, or if you're in the PDF, it's 138. I'm going to jump over to that myself. So it's NH5.B. It says, develop transparent guidelines and criteria for distributing resources, ensuring they are fair, impartial, and based on the needs of various neighborhoods and parts of Kyle. This is something that I don't know if I should open this box of worms, but again, it's going back to the language of fair, impartial, and based on needs. To me, these are things where I don't understand how you can have all of them, because my interpretation of fairness is that everyone is getting the same support from the city. Impartial, similar. I might change my definition of fair now that I'm thinking about that. This is what I've been doing all day. My head is a terrible place to be in. And then based on need. So based on need and impartial, I don't understand how that works together. I think something, depending on how you define fair, it could be fair and impartial, or it could be fair and based on need. It depends on how you interpret fair. So I think that what I might recommend, but I want to hear what you have to say. I might suggest that we strike fair and impartial and just say based on need, given the recommendation here is about exercising equitable distribution of resources. But that might be my misinterpretation of what we're trying to do.
Well, let me start by saying, I don't think you need to apologize for any of this. This is great. I mean, I really enjoy this. I think this is the way that you get at the best possible guiding document for your community. So I think it's an interesting set of questions. Let me think about this. So if we pose it as a bit of a thought experiment and we say that we were to strike fair and impartial and simply say based on needs, it is true that what this recommendation is doing is asking you to create a series of transparent guidelines. The guidelines themselves do not come out of this one sentence in the document. It's saying one of the tasks that you need to undertake as you begin to implement this plan is to develop a series of guidelines that will be transparent and help you make these kinds of resource allocation decisions in the future. So I would say at least partially the idea is that some of that needs to be fleshed out in the long run. But thinking about striking the words fair and impartial, I think I do not mean this to be that I'm simply trying to play the devil's advocate, but if we just kind of take this a little bit further and think about it, I wonder if the problem with having something as simple as needs is that it leaves open such openness for interpretation about what needs are. Let's think about a very specific small example. You got two neighborhoods in two different parts of Kyle, north, south, east, west. It doesn't really matter. And they both have a gap where there's no sidewalk. Which one of those needs the sidewalk connection more than the other? You would have to take into account a great many other things. And I would argue that some of that may have to do with inherent fairness of a sidewalk in a place that maybe one of them has a lot of sidewalk connectivity and this inherently makes, let's say that one of them has some sidewalk connectivity in it so that people have the capacity to walk along sidewalks, but this one gap makes it impossible for them to access, a grocery store or something like that on foot. Whereas the other one, perhaps it's more rural in nature and it doesn't have a lot of sidewalks, but there's a particular gap along a road where there's no other access to services. The needs are equal, there's a gap, but if we don't take fairness and perhaps logic into account, can we really determine based on that one criteria which one is appropriate? Ultimately, what I would suggest is that what we need to do with the recommendation is make it open-ended enough that these sorts of small nuanced issues can be sorted out in the guiding document that you create. We don't want to handicap the process of creating a guiding document by having a recommendation that's so narrow that you can't get at what you need to. Mm-hmm. But we do, I think, if we're wordsmithing right now, Transparency is really a big key. That gets at another one of the decision-making principles. People want to understand why you're making your decisions, and when people understand why a decision is being made, they often can see the inherent fairness in it if the process to get there was transparent. So I would encourage us to include that language, about transparency. I think fairness is like an inherently good goal of any guiding document. I do hear what you're saying about impartiality. Can something be both impartial and based on needs? I'd probably have to spend a little bit more time in the dictionary to answer that for you, but we're certainly happy to give it some thought.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I certainly assume that everything the city does, they aspire to be fair. So I'm fine to leave fair in there. I was just trying to think about how else could we phrase this where it would be clear and there wouldn't be like, well, I'm supposed to be impartial, but I'm supposed to base on need. And, well, what's fair? Like, I don't know.
I think it's a good point. You'll give us a day or so. We'll chat about it tomorrow, myself and the rest of the team, and we can discuss with staff and then explain this to council that this came up when we do the presentation to council and our recommendation going forward. And I presume that would be okay with staff, that they could just, if they choose to adopt the plan, they can adopt it with those caveats. We make the changes in the document, and when the final one comes back, it would be meeting with everybody's approval at that point.
Okay.
All right.
So staff, I wouldn't need to make any comment about that in a motion. Y'all could talk about it over the coming days? Okay. Yeah, because Lord knows I do not have the right solution for how to phrase that, so I will let y'all work that out. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate you volleying with me on that. Okay, are there any other questions for the staff? Okay.
Just for a thought here about fair and impartial. It seems to me that it's in common usage in language, fair and impartial, that has sort of legal underpinning to it in the end, if you really look at it. And so I appreciate the idea about addressing needs, but then the thought occurs to me that you can address needs impartially and be a fair judge of them, given the circumstance of any given situation. So I appreciate what you're saying about that and where that goes, but I think that we're kind of covered using the term fair and impartial from several different aspects, really. So I personally am comfortable with the usage of that language, for what that's worth.
Good. No, okay. Because I have the T's crossing and I's dotting list, I think I'm going to make the motion on this one. Okay. I'm really sorry to be nitpicky. I read this and I saw things and I wrote them down. So I would like to make a motion to recommend approval of the City of Kyle 2030 comp plan with the following amendments. So I would like to update on the acknowledgements page. That's, my Roman numeral skills are really bad. IV, sorry, I don't know what number that is, to include our new city council members and P&Z commissioners. On the growth sector map and future land use map, I don't know if there's anything that needs to be updated on it, but I do want us to double, triple check that all known developer agreements that we have in place right now are included and represented on both maps so that we don't get down the road where we have to vote on something that looks like it's in conflict with the plan. On page 66, it's a map about states of development. I see that unserved/undeveloped is showing up 2 times on the legend. I don't know if some of those is unserved, undeveloped within the city and then outside the ETJ. I'm not sure what they mean. They might both need to be there, but maybe a bit more clarity would be good. Page 109, it refers to a residential neighborhood place type. I motion that we change that to say traditional neighborhood to align with the place type that we have on page 73. And on page 110, I I think we're calling it a mixed-use place type or hang on, pause. Page 110. I didn't write this one down the whole way, so I gotta check it. Page 110. Yeah, we're calling it a mixed-use neighborhood on page 110, and I believe the term that we used was urban mixed-use place type. Almost done. Last one, page 127, LUGM 6.b refers to an urban village place type. I'm assuming that one is also meant to be urban mixed use. So, and if that's the case, I recommend that we update that one. 126, or 127, sorry, 127. Okay. So if you'll give me a second, I can try to recap that. Do I have to run through the whole list again every time I repeat the motion? Okay, thank God. So again, motion is to recommend approval to City Council on the comprehensive plan with the updates just named. Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Chairperson Onken and a second by Commissioner James. Any discussion on this before we vote? Yes.
Yeah. I think about a year and a half ago when I sat at the Texas APA Commission, I went to like the final awards thing because I was like curious what other comp plans look like. And I was like, man, I really want to win one of these awards. How do we do that? And I think we've got our answer, honestly. Like I've worked on a comp plan previously in a different community, and this is light years better. We can explain it. There is a history to it. This is great. And what I thought about 6 different questions, which is how do we tell the story of Kyle so people understand our decision? How do we connect the Kyle of yesterday to the Kyle of tomorrow? How do we help people in understanding why we're making critical changes at this time? How do we leave this process giving future councils and commissions a better process than what we've had to deal with for the last few years? Have we created a space in which everyone in Kyle gets a chance to be part of this plan if they want to be? And can we make it happen? I think this is the work that really defines what we do on this commission. It defines not only how we use land use, but also how future commissions and councils get to use land use. It's one of the most important decisions we can make. And I think we're making a really good decision. But I also will say, we can't control how future councils and commissions get to use our decision-making principles, or any of the things that we do in here. This is the trust that if we do our job the right way, we'll leave them seeing the decisions that we made, so that they can make decisions in line with what we did. I think we must be careful about limiting some of the things that we've put in this document, because it's broad for a reason. Because our council and commission will have different needs. Our city will have different needs in 5-10 years that we cannot address or will not address today. And so I'm excited to vote for this plan. I definitely just want to leave that there, because I think there's been a lot of discussion about very specifics, and we need to make sure that we make it broad enough that everybody can use it.
Beautifully said. If there are no other comments, we will go ahead and vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item number 7, staff report. Item 7A, staff report by Will Atkinson, Director of Planning. Or maybe not by Will Atkinson, Director of Planning, because I see Jason Lutz walking up
Jason
to
Lutz,
the...
Senior Planner. So yes, before I touch on this, congratulations. I was not expecting that quick of a conversation, so that's kudos to you guys for staying on top of this document throughout the process. We know from a planning perspective, it's not always the easiest read, although Virginity did a great job on making it that way. So the fact that you guys were able to follow along, we don't have a ton of changes. That's a testament to your work on this. So thank you again for that. So with having said that, we'll go on to staff report, kind of future items. So this is going to move to council on January 16th. Hopefully council will take action on that one and incorporate the changes that were recommended by chairman. After that, the kind of big work starts once the comp plan is adopted. We'll move next into the downtown master plan. Our goal would be an adoption in late February, early March. Kayla's doing a good job on finalizing that document so we can get that in front of you. And then once that is complete, we'll be working on and finalizing RFP for our code rewrite. That'll be the first action step in the comp plan to discuss. So you'll see at the end, there was year one, year two. Staff will need to kind of go through and kind of highlight, what's next on that list. But the code rewrite is a major one. We will work that RFP, bring that out, and hopefully have April, May, something before you guys in council for approval. And then during April, we also have the National Planning Conference. So I know several of you attended last year, Philadelphia. This year it's in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If y'all are interested in joining in person, those dates are the 13th through the 16th. We do have a budget for everybody to go. If you would like to attend but can't make the trip physically, then there are some online versions from May 8th through 10th. So just kind of look at your calendars, kind of let us know if you plan on attending so we can start working in those into our schedule. But that's all we have for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item number 8, adjournment.
Well, I have a question, and I'm sorry. And I just want to make sure that once the final draft of this comp plan is printed, that not only each of us and then current council gets copies, but also that we print enough copies for any future commissioners and council members so that they have a physical copy of it as well. It's just so much easier to try to have that, you handed it from the get-go when you're a commissioner so that they can review it and have time and be on top of that. And I just think that that's, if we have enough printed, then it's also a nice gift. Welcome to the commission. So if we don't mind.
Lovely idea.
Thank you. We'll make sure we get all of you guys an updated copy of this once it's approved.
Okay. Item number 8, adjournment. I'm gonna do it y'all's way this time. We need a motion and a second to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Lord, y'all. Okay, we have a motion to adjourn from Commissioner Stiegel and a second by Vice Chair DeLore. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion passes. We are adjourned at 7:33 p.m.